What's up guys, my name's Brandon and welcome back to Apple Weekly. In this episode, we're going to be discussing even more new features in iOS 26.1. We're going to talk about why Apple employees are concerned with the upcoming Siri revamp, why the iPhone Fold might get delayed, bad news for the iPhone Air, a crazy AirTag story, and more. Okay, so let's start by talking about what happened this week. So this week we did see the release of iOS 26.1 Beta 4, and it did include a pretty massive change when it comes to liquid glass, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the first thing I want to talk about is something that I did not cover in my initial What's New video, and that is actually inside of our settings. If we go into the phone settings right here and we scroll down, you can see that we have a brand new toggle for turning off the haptics. You guys know in iOS 26, when you get a phone call or when somebody answers on the other end of the line or when they hang up, you will get a haptic feedback. You will get haptic feedback when that happens, and you did not have a way to turn it off before without turning off haptics altogether. But now we have a toggle right there to turn that on or off. But of course, easily the biggest thing in iOS 26.1 Beta 4 that's got a lot of reactions, so both positive and negative reactions, and that is inside of the settings. If we go into display and brightness, we have a new liquid glass toggle here where you can choose between clear and tinted, and you can see the difference right there in the preview that it shows. And there's been a lot of reactions to this, so a lot of people are saying like Apple gave up. Apple's giving in to everybody by giving us the toggle to switch liquid glass off essentially. But in my opinion, even the tinted right here is still liquid glass. Liquid glass is not just, being able to see the background or not. So it's still liquid glass in my opinion. You can still see some light refracting in the back, so I don't think it's fully gone if you turn on tinted. Of course, it is a little bit toned down, but I think a lot of people are also kind of upset that Apple didn't add a slider to decrease or increase the intensity. We may still see that in the future. This is still a beta, so this is just what Apple has done so far. I'm glad that they added it personally. Obviously I like when Apple just gives us, something and we have to deal with it kind of thing, like especially when it comes to design. But I think it's okay to have a toggle here, especially because liquid glass impacts so much of the OS that I think having a toggle here is pretty nice to have clear and tinted. I personally think clear is better. It looks more like liquid glass, like what it was intended to be. Like if we go into music, for example, right here, and we scroll down, you can see, how that looks in the background. It's not as good as what we saw with Beta 1 of iOS 26. I'm still yearning for that, but it is still a solid move here. I like that Apple added at least some customization here for liquid glass. It's a start. But easily my favorite feature in iOS 26.1 Beta 4 is inside of the camera settings. If we scroll down near the bottom, we have lock screen swipe to open camera. So one of my least favorite, gestures on iOS has always been swiping over to invoke the camera. I never liked that because we always had the quick control down there at the bottom, and of course now we have the camera control, action button, all these different ways to invoke the camera to take a picture, and so we really never needed that gesture, but there was never a way to turn it off before now with 26.1 Beta 4, so this is where that toggle comes into play. But aside from those changes, there's not really a lot going on. Of course, we did see a change as well to when you're kind of hovering over a menu item right here, it does not have a kind of highlight to it. So when you hover over a menu item down here in the nav bar before in previous versions, it would give this kind of highlight effect. So it'd make the red right there on new appear more bright and everything around it a little bit more bright. Now it's a little bit more subtle with this fourth beta. So it looks a little bit cleaner. Some people are not a fan of that because they think it doesn't register the click as easily. Like you can't tell that you're clicking on it as easily, but I disagree with that. I think you could see it just fine. So what do you guys think overall about these changes to liquid glass and the customization options to liquid glass with Beta 4? I'm really curious to see your thought because we're getting close to the RC and the final release. So it's really looking like these are going to ship with 26.1. And by the way, I mentioned this in my What's New video, but if you go into our settings and go down to the Apple Intelligence and Siri section, you'll notice that it does not say beta. I covered that in my initial What's New video, but Apple has not really come out and said anything to this. So we don't know for sure if Apple is, basically taking Apple Intelligence out of beta just yet. Maybe when 26.1 officially releases, we will see them say that, or maybe they're just not going to mention it at all and just remove beta from here. But at this point, it seems like Apple Intelligence, at least according to the visual here, is out of beta. Now, I've been testing this to see if there's any type of improvements or anything different from 26.0, and I've not really been able to see anything. So, just because it's out of beta doesn't mean it's going to be any better. At least from what I've experienced, it seems to be the same as it has been. Now, speaking of Apple Intelligence and Siri, we have to talk about the upcoming Siri revamp. This is by far the most anticipated feature of iOS 26, and it's going to be coming early next year with iOS 26.4, but some Apple employees employees who've been testing this are kind of concerned about this Siri feature, this Siri revamp. And we know this because there was a report from Mark Gurman, and he mentioned that the recent Apple executives and kind of the important names from Apple in the AI space and the AI division, they left Apple to go to Meta, and that's basically been causing a big stir internally at Apple because they're losing a lot of their top talent. But Gurman said this: "These resignations are not going to stop. I strongly believe there will be more senior members of the company's AI ranks hitting the exits soon, especially if the new Siri coming in the spring falls flat. Already, there are concerns from people testing iOS 26.4, the OS version slated to include the new Siri, about the voice assistant's performance." So yeah, there's not only turmoil within Apple, especially in the AI division, but it seems like they're not very optimistic about this Siri revamp. And, I don't want to make this seem like it's super pessimistic. This is just a report. We don't really know internally what's going on at Apple. These are just reports. So it could be completely the opposite. We really don't know. But it does seem like, if Apple doesn't really show us, something great with iOS 26.4 and this revamped Siri, it's kind of, we've already been let down so many times. I really don't think it's going to be that big of a deal if Apple does not deliver here. Like, it's going to be disappointing, but it's going to be like the 10th disappointment. So I don't think expectations are very high right now. Obviously I'm hoping something great happens, and I do think it's going to be bad if it doesn't. But at the same time, we've been let down so many times by Apple when it comes to Apple Intelligence that I just think expectations are kind of in the gutter at this point. So my hopes are low, or I should say my expectations are low, but my hopes are high. So what do you guys think about this? Are you concerned for the new Apple Intelligence, the new Siri revamp, or what are your thoughts overall on what to expect from that? Now let's talk about another version of software, and that is CarPlay, because we're now hearing that GM is going to remove CarPlay from all future vehicles, including gas cars. So yes, in an interview with The Verge, the GM CEO, Mary Barra, said that they're not only using their own software platform for EVs currently, but they're eventually going to expand across the entire GM lineup. So yes, gas cars, every GM vehicle is specifically going to be made to not include Apple CarPlay and, Android Auto. So neither one of those are going to be available on GM vehicles because they want to use their own software. Now you guys see me holding this cosmic orange iPhone right here. This one looks normal right now, but apparently some people on Reddit and on TikTok are not seeing their cosmic orange iPhone fare so well after about a month of usage. Because if you take a look at these pictures, some people are seeing discoloration issues. And taking a look at these posts and these pictures, it looks like some people's iPhones are turning like a kind of a pink hue, kind of a rose gold color for some users. So some people are actually getting replacements from Apple now, according to some of these Reddit posts. I personally have not seen any type of discoloring of my iPhone 17 Pro Max right here in cosmic orange. I've also never seen anybody else having this issue, but apparently a small subset of users are facing this issue with it becoming discolored. So if you've had an experience like this, please let me know in a comment down below, because that seems pretty crazy. Now we also got some big news from Apple this week regarding F1, because Apple announced a partnership with Formula One for exclusive US coverage. So they said that Apple and Formula One today announced a 5-year partnership that will bring all F1 races exclusively to Apple TV in the United States beginning next year. So if you are somebody who's into watching F1 races, this is a big deal because they'll all be on Apple TV free now, of course, if you have the subscription, which is awesome. Now going back to iOS 26.1 Beta 4, I want to talk about the performance and the battery life, because performance, there's not really much to talk about here. I think performance is pretty much the same as it has been on the past few betas. I am hoping to see some type of improvement with the RC. However, with battery life, I have finally noticed a difference with battery life for the first time on these 26.1 betas. If you guys saw my video, I actually stayed at the same battery percentage throughout the entire video in that What's New video. And now, after using it for a few days on my main device, including my iPhone Air, I can tell you right now that battery life has improved on 26.1 Beta 4. Finally, that's really the first time I've seen a big improvement in battery life. Maybe not big improvement, but a noticeable improvement since the iOS 26.0 betas. So if you had any type of issues with battery life on 26.0 or 26.1, the early betas, those could very well be solved with this update. But if they're not resolved for you, you might see a fix in the next update. And let's talk about that, because we should be seeing the RC build for iOS 26.1 next week, most likely on Monday, October 27th. Apple's been sticking to these Mondays lately, so I would expect them to, continue with those Monday releases with the RC, the release candidate, which is essentially the final release for beta testers. And then we should see the final official public release for everybody to come out the following Monday on November 3rd. And then after we see iOS 26.1 get released, we will see iOS 26.2 beta 1 go out shortly after, and that is expected to be a pretty big release. Probably 26.2 and 26.4 will be the big releases for this release cycle. All right, so now let's move on to some more Apple news. And let's start by talking about Apple cutting iPhone Air production amid underwhelming sales. So according to the Elec, the iPhone 17 Pro and Pro Max are seeing higher sales than expected, while the standard iPhone 17 is also a major success, performing significantly better than the iPhone 16 base model. However, the iPhone Air is the underwhelming model this year, apparently, and Apple is planning to reduce production by 1 million units this year. So pretty big cut there. Meanwhile, Apple plans to increase production for all other models by 2 million units. So yeah, the iPhone Air is not selling nearly as well as Apple anticipated, which is not too surprising. Personally, I mean, every year people buy the Pro iPhones more than any other model by a long shot. And of course, the base model is going to appeal to more people as well. The iPhone Air is really just for a select subset of people. I personally love the iPhone Air. I'm still using it on a daily basis, but it is underwhelming in terms of these sales. And that's not too surprising. I think the Pro and Pro Max are always going to be by far and away the best sellers. But it's going to be really interesting to see how the iPhone Fold comes into play and how that's going to sell, especially if the iPhone Air is already existing as well. Like, are they going to switch the iPhone Air for the iPhone Fold? Are they going to sell both at the same time with the Pro and Pro Max and the base model? It's going to be confusing, but it's going to be really interesting to see. And I think that's why Apple's going to do the staggered release, where we have the Pros and the Foldables at the end of the year, and then the base model and the Airs in the beginning of the following year, like the springtime. But let's expand a little bit more on that foldable iPhone, because we're now hearing that it might actually get delayed until 2027. We've been hearing for a long time now that Apple's first foldable iPhone is going to come in 2026, but now we're hearing some bad news that it might actually get delayed until 2027. And here's why. So this comes from the Elec, and they're saying that it might get released in 2027 due to Apple taking longer to decide on key design elements such as the hinge. And the report also mentions that the expected production of display panels for the foldable iPhone have decreased from 13 million to 9 million units. So Apple's expecting to sell less of these now. And also they're saying that a 2026 launch is still possible, but if this does go as planned, device production in the first year of release may lag behind panel production by as much as 5 to 7 million units. So it sounds like if we get this foldable iPhone in 2026, they're not going to have as much production as they originally anticipated. So it could be 2027, with a full production, they will have as many production units in 2027, or it could come in 2026 with maybe less units available, at least at the time. So we'll have to wait and see. I'm really anticipating the iPhone Fold, so I really hope we see that at the end of next year in 2026. Now, also next year, we're going to see Apple's A20 chip, and we're hearing that this might be pretty expensive. So this comes from China Times, and they're saying that it's rumored in the industry that the last generation 3 price of nanoprocess CPU has risen by about 20% compared to the previous generation, and the selling price of the 2 nanometer process will increase by more than 50% next year. So yeah, TSMC is already telling customers to expect a 50% increase over the 3 nanometer processors. And this is due to the high capital expenditure of the new node and the lack of discounting strategies, while yields are still in their early acceptable phase. So yeah, the A20 chip will be the first 2 nanometer process for Apple, and it's looking like the price is going to be quite expensive, literally 50% more. So we'll wait and see if that goes down with time, but it seems like Apple may potentially be raising prices for this, maybe not. A lot of times these production costs, like these increases, don't always lead to price jumps for us, like for the retail side. So we'll have to wait and see, but this is a pretty interesting development if Apple is going to go ahead with the 2 nanometer process as they are expected to. Now, looking even further ahead, let's talk about the 18-inch foldable iPad, because this is apparently now going to be delayed from 2028 to 2029, according to Mark Gurman over at Bloomberg. And he's saying that this thing could cost up to $3,900 $100. So Gurman is reporting that Apple wanted to launch this device in 2028, but there are problems with the display technology and the weight, so it's going to potentially cause it to be pushed back until 2029 instead of 2028. And as Mac Rumors points out, multiple rumors have suggested that Apple is working on a large foldable device, though information has diverged on whether it will be positioned as an iPad or like a foldable Mac. So it's going to have about an 18-inch display from Samsung, and Apple's going to focus on minimizing the display crease, which we're also hearing about the phone. We're hearing that the crease is going to be basically invisible when you're not, when you're looking at the screen. Maybe when you fold it and the screen is off, you'll be able to see it, but with the screen on, apparently we're not going to be able to see a crease, even on a big 18-inch display. So 2029, that's kind of a far ways away, but it is interesting to see how this is going to play out, especially if it's going to cost $3,900. That's kind of crazy. Hopefully it gets cheaper than that. And then finally, let's talk about another crazy AirTag story. So this time, a man in Minnesota walked outside one evening and quickly noticed that his Kia was gone, and all that was left was shattered glass on the driveway. And after reviewing security footage, it showed two men approaching the parked car, throwing something to break the window, and then climbing in before driving off with the car within minutes. But what the thieves didn't know was that the man had hidden an AirTag in the car. And it wasn't just in the back seat. He actually hid this really well because it was an advanced placement, and he said they put the AirTag in a lockbox and taped it inside of the engine bay. So pretty smart to avoid any thieves actually finding it. So after it was stolen, he said that he didn't want to rely solely on the police, knowing that it could take a while for them to locate his car, if at all. So he immediately called police and gave them the AirTag's live location from the Find My app. And it turns out the car was just about a mile away. So officers followed the signal when he called them, and they found the stolen Kia with one of the suspects asleep inside. And the car was in rough shape because it had its window smashed, the steering wheel column was destroyed, and the dash cam was missing. And the victim, Christopher, even said that if he could afford to get rid of the car, he would, but he could not, unfortunately. But still, at least he got the car back in the same day, all thanks to the AirTag that was hidden inside. So pretty awesome story. Again, always put an AirTag in everything that you own that's expensive, especially a car or anything like that that could be stolen. If you don't already have tracking technology on the car, it's so important. And also try to hide it as well, because thieves are getting smart and they'll be able to tell when you have an AirTag. They'll get the alert on their phone and they'll look for it and they'll try to throw it out. So put it somewhere discreet, and the engine bay is maybe a little bit too advanced, but just try to put it somewhere where it's not too obvious that you have an AirTag in there. But anyways, guys, there you have it. That is it for this episode. I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Also be sure to let me know down in a comment below your thoughts on iOS 26.1, that liquid glass toggle, and of course anything else that you found interesting in the video. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.